This is the third in a series of videos that survey the Shakespearean canon, and now we're going to look at the 10 plays that make up the tragedies. Of course, this idea of looking at Shakespeare's plays by genre was introduced to us in the first folio of 1623, when his friends, Hemmings and Condell, pulled together the group of plays that they knew him to have written, at least all of those that they could get hands on good copies of, and they arranged them into three categories: comedies, histories, and tragedies. We now subdivide the comedies into a group that we still call comedies and a second group that we call romances, because they are a mixed genre, tragic comedies. But the tragedies remains a pretty firm designation of the plays. There are three kinds of tragedies in the Shakespearean canon. The first is revenge tragedies. One of Shakespeare's earliest plays was co-written with a man named George Peele, and it is a revenge tragedy called Titus, Andronicus. There's a wonderful film of this made by Julie Taymor, easily attainable, starring Anthony Hopkins as Titus. This is a play set in Imperial Rome, but it's not historical, not historically accurate, and it is built in the form that it is clearly an imitation of the plays of Seneca, that extraordinarily violent playwright of the Roman period, whose plays we now think were probably not even performed. We think that Seneca's plays were only made to be read. But Shakespeare and his friends of this period didn't really know that, and they were quick to imitate these very popular plays by Seneca, and created plays of extraordinary violence. Titus has numerous on-stage murders. Titus cuts his own hand off on stage. A character that is raped off stage has her hands cut off, her tongue torn out so that she can't report who her rapists are. And it ends with an act of revenge in which Titus kills the two sons of his chief enemy, chops them up, bakes them into meat pies a la Sweeney Todd, and serves them to her. It was for a long time thought of as such a trashy and sensational play that it was completely unperformable. But as we have approached the late 20th century, a century of appalling and extraordinary violence, and carried forth into the 21st, where things don't look much better, the violence and ugliness and satire of this play have seemed much more current, and it's come back into the repertoire. It's worth mentioning that Hamlet is also a revenge tragedy and fits into this same pattern, but we really think of it as belonging to the group of 5 plays that we would call the major tragedies. There's certainly an argument that these are the most critically acclaimed 5 plays in the entire canon, and they are certainly all very well-known plays, almost so well-known that they don't need an introduction. The first of these, Romeo and Juliet, was written almost simultaneously with Midsummer Night's Dream. It treats some of the very same themes as Midsummer Night's Dream. It appears maybe even that Midsummer Night's Dream is parodying the final death scene here in Romeo and Juliet in its subplay, Pyramus and Thisbe. Romeo and Juliet, of course, famously a play about these star-crossed lovers, young man, young woman, from warring families that fall in love with each other, but there is no path forward through which they can find happiness, and ultimately they both find death. Hamlet, I would say, is a play needing no introduction whatsoever. The only note I make here about it is that it is in fact a revenge play itself. Revenge plays were a very important genre during this time period. And Shakespeare seems to have mastered it to a degree that no one else ever did. Hamlet, of course, being thought of as maybe the greatest work of dramatic literature ever written. But we will want to consider it at least some time and in some ways measure it against this idea that it is a revenge tragedy on a pattern familiar to us from this period. Othello is a play that seems surprisingly current in its view of discrimination, of what happens to an ethnic outsider, the way in which an outsider, a person can be signaled out for ethnicity, and the way in which that can eat away at his self-confidence, his mind in general. Of course, he is on some level an innocent victim, but also a man driven mad by jealousy and by the plot of his underling Iago, and he eventually murders his own wife, whom he incorrectly believes to be unfaithful. Macbeth is a play that we know only in a version that was edited after Shakespeare's death by Thomas Middleton into a shorter form, and which incorporates some material from Middleton's own repertoire. That is, we don't have the original script of Macbeth. We have the only edition we have is this somewhat rewritten version. It is easily available if you'd like to watch a contemporary version of it online from PBS, starring Patrick Stewart as Macbeth. This Scottish king. This was a play written apparently to please King James, who was of Scottish descent, was the King of Scotland before he came to England as Elizabeth's successor, and also simultaneously became the King of England. The final of the four major tragedies is King Lear, an astonishing play written for an aged actor about a man, a king who is abdicating his responsibilities and turning it over to his daughters to take over the kingdom, and it turns out that really doesn't go well for him. Shakespeare wrote four more tragedies, all set in the classical period in Greece or Rome. Some of these are more famous than others. Probably the most famous of them is Julius Caesar, because this has long been a school play. Many of us read this early in our school years. This is a play about the factual conditions surrounding the assassination of Julius Caesar, just as he was moving forward to become the first emperor of Rome. Rome had been a republic, but he became so popular that he was about to become crowned its emperor, and those part of democratic forces who favored keeping Rome as a republic decided to assassinate him. The central character in the assassination plot is Brutus, and Brutus is really the protagonist of this play. Julius Caesar, though the title character, is assassinated halfway through the play and disappears completely, and the back half of the play essentially traces the fight between Brutus and Mark Antony to achieve some sort of justice for Julius Caesar. Shortly after, Shakespeare wrote a magnificent play taking up the later life of Mark Antony, a period of time when the aftermath of this assassination of Julius Caesar was still going on, and there was still some doubt about who was going to succeed him exactly. Brutus had been hunted down and murdered or punished for his assassination of Julius Caesar, but the country Rome, the Empire of Rome, did not have a clear ruler, a triumvirate. Three people took over as co-rulers. Mark Antony was one of those, and he also became the ruler of the Roman colony in Egypt and had a famous affair with Cleopatra. This affair led to such a distraction in his life that he sort of wasted away as a warrior and eventually lost a great war to the man who became Caesar Augustus, who was the first emperor of Rome. Eventually took over everything. This is sometimes thought of as a called play that is Romeo and Juliet for grown-ups. It has to do with a pair of lovers who ultimately end their lives through suicide. But they are now middle-aged instead of children. It's quite a beautiful play, not often produced because of its enormous scope. It's a very, very large play. It takes a cast of almost 50 characters. A much underperformed play is Coriolanus, and it's not exactly clear why, because it's almost always successful when it is produced. And everyone acts like it's a great surprise every time. That, boy, somebody did Coriolanus, and it turns out that it's really good. Coriolanus has to do with the very, very early days of the Roman Republic, clear back even about the time that Plautus was writing, long before the emperors, and has to do with this man. Coriolanus is not his name, it's his title. It means that he is the conqueror of the Corollae, rival people living in a rival city. And after he goes over and conquers these threatening neighbors and saves Rome, he comes back to Rome, and the ordinary people of Rome reject him for being too haughty, too angry, and throw him out of the city, exile him, and he immediately goes over to help his enemies, the Corollae, and who march on Rome, are on the verge of conquering it, when his mother, Volumnia, comes out and begs Coriolanus to take pity on the city, to call off what will undoubtedly be successful invasion. He agrees and is promptly murdered by his new army mates, the Corollae, for betraying them. Maybe the most difficult play in the canon is Timon of Athens, co-written by Thomas Middleton. The script we have might not even be a finished play, but the tone of this play is completely and utterly bizarre. It's so angry, so bitter, so cynical and dark that it's had a great deal of difficulty holding the stage, though the National Theatre recently did a production of it with Simon Russell Beale that proved relatively successful. The chances that you will get to see this in any form except the film made of the Simon Russell Beale production are very slight, but it is worth attending to simply because it is one of the plays we know that was co-written by Shakespeare and a partner, in this case Thomas Middleton. And that is an overview of the 10 plays that constitute the tragic canon of Shakespeare.